Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. And I'm very excited to do another hangout from the field from Mozambique with Andrea Marshall. So she's out there right now with one of our textbook-sized satellite units. She's using it to connect via satellite to be able to broadcast and hang out with us here today. So Andrea is a Manta Ray expert, marine biologist, first person to get her PhD in mantas. She's also a National Geographic explorer and the co-founder of an awesome organization called the Marine Megafauna Foundation, researching and protecting large marine life in Mozambique. So whale sharks, mantas, sea turtles, and the like. And we're always excited when we can steal some of her time, especially when she's on a beautiful beach in Mozambique doing some field work. So good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Joe. Happy to be with you guys today.
All right. Well, it's always great to have you joining us. Your location looks absolutely phenomenal. I can see your little field zodiac in the background. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're up to?
Well, we just got in from a very long field day at sea, so it's kind of evening time here. And we've been out since about 7 o'clock this morning doing surveys for large marine megafauna. So as you mentioned, animals like whale sharks and mantas. We had a lot of dolphin today, sort of sea turtles, basically mapping their distribution in the Bazru to Archipelago National Park. So just over my shoulder is kind of the national park. And this is one of our launching sites from here. So it's a really beautiful archipelago, about a third of the way up the country in Mozambique. And it's the home of really large megafauna species. And we're kind of in charge of learning more about these animals and figuring out how to offer them better protection along this coastline.
All right. And so I mentioned that you were the first person to get your PhD in mantas. Can you tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit about your path to go from someone who was maybe interested in the ocean to living in Mozambique and being an expert on a species?
Sure. Well, I actually arrived at this coastline about 16 years ago. So I've been working here for a very long time. And when I first started running exploratory expeditions into the country, I noted how many large threatened species of animals we were seeing along this coastline. Anything from humpback whales to whale sharks and mantas and different species of sharks, almost all of the species of turtle. And I thought, well, this seems like a really important hotspot for these animals, but there was absolutely no research or any type of protection happening for them. And so I decided to try to focus in on one of the animals, which was the manta ray. And during the course of the time that I was here, I actually discovered there was 2 species of mantas living along this coastline. There are 2 actually species of mantas living globally, but at the time, we only knew about one of them. So I ended up doing my PhD, focusing in on both of those species and learning some of the very first information about these animals, and then discovered that this spot that we had found in Mozambique represents really the largest known aggregation of these animals in all of Africa and on the entire continent. So then that kind of provoked me to kind of do more work along this coastline, find out what other species were living here, and ultimately try and figure out how to get better protection for these very important populations in Africa.
All right. Well, I think this is a good time. You were just talking about the mantas. I'm going to pull up those pictures that I have ready and let the classrooms get a feel for what they look like and just how big they are and see you in action.
Yeah, they are actually really big animals.
Yeah. All right. So, boys and girls, I'm going to share my screen and then I'll talk just very briefly as the photos pop up, and you can just get a feel for these amazing creatures. So you should be able to see it now on my screen. So here's a shot. This is in Ecuador, I believe. And here's Andrea swimming with one of the mantas. You can see just how big they are. You can see a couple of remora hitching a ride. That's a great photo. Here's another shot of Andrea in Mexico. And she's using a really cool mask here that lets her talk and communicate underwater, which is great, I think, if you're doing a documentary or something and people can hear what you're saying. So that's pretty cool.
Definitely.
And actually, I just caught a look at your fins. Those are pretty cool fins that you're wearing. With the mantas on
I do. I have them here with me. They're actually carbon fiber fins, and so they're really, really strong and flexible. and they give me that extra little bit of oomph that I need to kind of swim long distance after these animals. Some of these guys are very fast swimmers, so even when they're not moving very fast, it requires a lot of speed just to keep pace with them and be able to do the various types of research that we do.
All right. Here's another shot in Mexico of a giant manta. You can see another remora hitching a ride on top. Here's a great shot of the silhouette. So you can't really see the markings on the bottom in this photo, but Andrea, those markings are pretty important. Why are they important, and what are you trying to do with them?
Absolutely. Well, it's really important to be able to distinguish between individual animals if you're going to understand how large a population is. So when we first started studying mantas, what was really exceptional about them in comparison to a lot of other animals in the ocean is they have these really obvious spot patterns all over their bellies. And those spot patterns can be used just like a human fingerprint. So every single animal has a different type of pattern on its belly, and you can tell every single individual apart. They have those patterns from the time they're born, and they don't change over the course of their life. So it really enabled us to study individuals within a population, tell how large the population was, and study the individuals over time in a way that's very difficult in other marine species. So just the fact that they have this patterning has made manta rays a lot easier for us to study, and we've been able to learn a lot about them because they have these distinguishing marks.
All right, awesome. And then the final picture that I have queued up is a group of mantas at a cleaning station. So can you tell us a little bit about a cleaning station?
Sure, that's actually one of the best places to study mantas. So mantas actually come inshore almost on a daily basis into relatively shallow water, 15, 20, 30, 40 feet of water to be cleaned by tiny little, we call them cleaner fish. The mantas know to come to certain patches of reef, and then those little cleaner fish attend to different parts of their body, cleaning anything from parasites off of them or to algae buildup, or any type of, if a shark has bitten a manta and it has a little bit of a wound, it can help with the healing of that wound by picking off, little bits of tissue around that injury. And so these areas are really important for the manta's health, but we also know where these cleaning stations are. So it saves me from having to swim around the ocean too much every day, because I can actually just go right to the cleaning stations and I can find the mantas almost immediately. And it makes it a lot easier for us to record individuals and actually study them. So it's kind of like, going to a spa bath every day, and so these animals just swim around for maybe an hour and all the fish clean them and attend to them. It's pretty really neat to watch, actually.
All right, and I lied. There's one more. I'm going to come back now from the screen share, ask you a few more questions before we meet our classroom. So you're in the water and you get to see a manta, which is pretty awesome. Uh-oh. Oh, I think I froze for a sec, but I think it's going now. So, Andrea, you're in the water, you get to see a manta, you get a picture of the bottom. What other kind of work might you do?
Well, typically, I'll collect a little bit of tissue from the animal. So we do a lot of studies by using a little bit of skin or a little bit of tissue from the animal, and I can collect that with a tiny little biopsy stick. So I don't take very much. I take a tiny little bit of tissue from the animal, but we're able to learn things, everything from looking at the genetics of the animal, but also learning what kind of food they eat. I know it sounds strange, but you can actually learn what kind of food an animal eats by just looking at their actual tissue, because you do incorporate the animals that you eat, kind of their signature goes into your muscle tissue. So you can kind of find out what they're eating. We also place a lot of different types of tags on the animals. So one of the things that we're really interested in about mantas is where they travel to when they leave the coastline. We see them at these cleaning stations, but then they venture off into the open ocean. And the only way to be able to find out where they go is be able to put tiny little tags on the animals that kind of register their location wherever they go, so that we can track their movements. And it tells us a lot about how they spend their day, what their behavior is like, how long they travel over long periods of time, how deep they dive. And ultimately that information allows us to come up with better management strategies because we know what their daily habits are. So that's been really important type of research that we've done, especially for their conservation globally. So we do that. Like I said before, we take a lot of photos. So we have a lot of really advanced like photography, big underwater housings that we take underwater, or we sometimes use drones like this one to be able to track their distribution along coastlines. So I send my drone up almost every morning to actually look at, how the mantas are feeding, where they're feeding at the surface. And then we know which areas of the coastline to target for diving that day, because we can see where the animals are spending their time. So we use a lot of different types of technology to find the mantas. And then once we find the mantas, we do a lot of things to the animals themselves underwater to learn more about their daily lives.
All right. Well, my next ask was going to be to show some gear, but you beat me to it.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's great. All right. Well, I think that we should meet some of our classrooms now, because I'm sure that they have some questions. So first, to Mrs. Utzig's class, who's joining us from Verona, Wisconsin. If you can hear and see us, and I assume you can because you're still hanging out with us, send me a couple questions via email, and I'll make sure that we ask those questions for Andrea. So send us in a couple questions. But let's go to a classroom in North Palm Beach, Florida. Mr. LaVogue, he's got some grade 2s with him, and they joined us last week with a different group of students, but they enjoyed it so much we have another group hanging out with us today. So how's it going, grade 2s?
Say hi.
Good. Hi.
All right, Jacqueline's going to ask our question. Jacqueline, want to come up to the camera?
Me and Anna, we both had a question. We were researching, and it said that manta rays were the first ones to pass the mirror test. What is the mirror test?
Great question. Did you have 2 questions in a row, or you want me to answer them separately?
Just the one? That was just one question.
Okay. All right. Okay. So the mirror test is a test that biologists kind of developed in order to see if they could determine if an animal has self-recognition. And so one of the ways they devised to be able to do that is if you put a mark on an animal, like just say you're talking about a monkey, right? And you put a mark on its face or its head, and then you show that animal its reflection in a mirror. If they know that image of the individual in the mirror is themselves, then they kind of touch their own face because they feel like, oh, look at that animal in the mirror, that's me, and it has something on its face. So they'll touch their face, and you kind of understand that they know that they're an individual, and that individual is being projected into that mirror. So it's a kind of a way for a biologist to be able to gauge whether or not an animal understands or has self-recognition. So they developed that test for terrestrial animals, and they're just starting to try and use or test that for marine species or aquatic species. And the very preliminary time that they tested that for mantas in aquarium, the biologist that ran that study believed that she saw some signs for self-recognition. So I think in that study, what she said is that maybe there's an indication that they have self-recognition, and definitely more in-depth studies should be done to determine if that is the case.
All right. Well, that's an awesome question. Grade 2s to start us off. Good job. We're going to come back and visit your classroom in just a minute, but first we're going to go to Mrs. Venegas' group. They are joining us in Wisconsin, and they're a 4th grade classroom, so let me turn their microphone on. How's it going, grade 4s?
Hi. I have a question for her. What are the types of manta ray called?
What are the types of manta ray called? Well, currently there's 2 recognized species of mantas, and because I discovered that there was 2 different ones, I was allowed to kind of give them a common name or a pet name, not a scientific name, but, kind of general names. The smaller of the manta species I felt was really associated with reefs, like coral reefs, and tends to stay quite inshore. So we call that one either the inshore manta or the reef manta, just to kind of describe where its habitat is. The other species of manta was so significantly larger than the other species of manta. It's a much bigger animal that we decided to affectionately call that one the giant manta. Additionally, after studying it a little bit more, we realized that manta spends a lot of time offshore in deep water and seems to be much more oceanic. So a lot of people are also affectionately calling it sort of the offshore or the oceanic manta as well. And those are kind of the common names that we use for the two recognized species. But great question.
All right. This time we're going to go to, we've got lots of classes in Wisconsin today. So this is another grade 4 classroom, Mrs. Knope's group. Let me turn their microphone on. How's it going, grade 4s?
All right. Good morning. I'm going to have Emerson ask a question.
So have you been studying the plastics? And if you have been, are the plastics in the ocean, like the pollution in the ocean, affecting manatees' daily life? Manta rays.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that question. That's been something that I've been really interested in for a very long time, even though kind of like ocean pollution is becoming quite popular topic like these days. I've been concerned about that issue probably for the last decade. And I'm so excited to be able to have one of my students focusing specifically on that question now. She's just wrapping up her PhD. She has some really great results that hopefully she can start sharing with the world very soon. But to give you an idea, the preliminary information that we have back is that, yes, mantas are being affected by the plastics in our ocean, just like many animals. They are filter feeders, and they feed on some of the smallest animals in the ocean called zooplankton, little suspended animals that kind of float around. But as they're kind of trying to target these little animals that are floating around, guess what else is floating around? Plastic. So they inadvertently consume a lot of plastic. We've actually seen manta rays ingesting it ourselves. We're also starting to find it in some stomach contents and in fecal samples. She's actually studying the biochemistry as well of the animals and kind of learning that they actually are consuming plastics over time. And we're starting to look at the effects of that plastic, not just in that it's filling their stomach with plastic, but what the toxins that adhere to the plastics, what they're doing to the animals long term in terms of how it changes their sort of endocrine system and the way that they function as animals. It can have really serious effects on their health long term. So I'm really excited about that study being done because I think it's really important to understand what the effects of plastics are on the animals in the ocean. It's not plastics, in our ocean, it's not just about it looking bad, but it's about really how it affects all of the animals in the ocean. And I think these types of studies will really challenge people to take on the plastics issue and figure out how we can clean our oceans up. So yeah, thank you very much for that question. The water is starting to creep up on me, and I'm actually going to let my skipper go home because I think he's not going to be able to drive back to our main base if he doesn't leave now. So let's just wave to Zito and tell him he can go bye-bye. Thanks, Zito.
All right. Are you going to be able to get back?
Sure. But the water's slowly creeping in. So it's almost reaching me now, but I'm going to be fine. But I'm starting to get flooded, as you can see. The water's like creeping up slowly on my equipment.
All right. Well, if you need to move something, feel free to do so.
Not at all. I'm fine.
All right. I just got questions from there's kindergartens and grade 1s, a group of 43 of them, with Mrs. Utzig in Wisconsin as well. And they're the ones who, they're in the Hangout, but we can't hear and see them, but they can hear and see us. And they just sent me a couple great questions. So do they lay eggs or do they carry their young in their belly?
Manta rays actually have a really interesting type of reproductive ecology. So it's a little different than a normal some sharks have similar reproductive systems, but some sharks, as you know, and some rays actually deposit eggs into the ocean which hatch. Some animals are live bearing, so they give birth to live young. Mantas are the kind that gives birth to live young. But what's really interesting about how they grow their young inside of their bodies before they give birth, they actually create a very rich, almost lipid-rich, very fatty milk that they feed their offspring inside of them. And that's what helps the manta rays grow so big. And so when a manta ray gives birth, its offspring is about, anywhere from 3 to 4 feet, sometimes even 5 feet when it's born. And so they actually have to feed their offspring this really rich milk inside of their bodies in order to get them to be that size. And we think that they give birth to such live young or such large young to help as a defense against predators, because manta rays don't really have teeth to speak of. They don't really have big teeth, and they don't have a stinging spine. So there's no real way for them to kind of protect themselves when they're really small, except to be born at a reasonably large size. So yeah, that's what we think that they do, and that's how their reproductive strategy works. So very cool question.
All right, and in fact, I can see them on the camera now. So maybe we're working. Let's try it out. I'm gonna turn your mic on. How's it going, kindergartens and grade ones?
Cool.
Oh, can you see them? They're waving like crazy, but we don't have volume. But they're waving. There they are.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to swing through and visit our classrooms again. But our kindergarten and grade ones in Wisconsin had another good question, which was the fish, the remoras attached to them. What are they doing? Why are the remoras attached to the mantas?
Well, remoras are actually kind of almost like a parasitic animal, if you will, to the mantas, in that they don't offer any benefit for the animals. They actually do quite a bit of harm. So from the remoras perspective, they are basically hitching a ride. So remoras have modified the top of their head to actually function like a suction cup. And they literally suck themselves to the mantas. And the mantas don't have any hands, so they can't remove them. And then the remoras get a free ride. So wherever the manta travels, the remoras get to travel there without expending any energy. But because they suck onto the mantas really hard, they actually leave a bunch of almost like lacerations and injuries on the animal. And then those injuries get infected with parasites, and it actually affects the health of the mantas. So the mantas are helping them out by taking them from location to location, but the remoras actually do quite a bit of harm to the mantas. So they're not necessarily their friends.
All right, let's swing back to Florida with our grade 2s and see if they have another question.
Would you like that?
Yes, we do, Joe. Yes, we do. And we're going to have to get going in a few minutes after this question. So thanks for taking a second question. Chloe, go ahead.
Have you been anywhere except for Africa?
To study mantas.
Actually, yes, I do study them actually all over the world. So Joe talked about our organization called the Marine Megafauna Foundation. That's our logo on my hat. And our organization works on different species of threatened animals all over the world. So I've had programs in Ecuador before on mantas. We have a long-running program in Indonesia on manta rays. We work in the Komodo National Park and Raja Ampat. We actually have a project in Florida. So we actually have a new project that's only been underway for a couple of years now, studying what potentially could be a third species of manta off the coast of Florida. Yeah, we're excited to grow that project. It actually looks like a major aggregation site for mantas off Florida. So that's a new project of ours, and we're very excited about that one. I've also worked in Mexico before. I collaborate with people working in Brazil. So I have traveled all over the world doing work on mantas. It's just that my home now is in Mozambique. I'm very dedicated to this population specifically, and I intend to spend at least a good portion of the rest of my life here protecting the mantas off this coastline.
Excellent. Thank you, obviously, so much for what you do. And I don't think I say it enough. Thank you so much for all the time you dedicate to hanging out with classrooms. I really appreciate it, and I know the classrooms love it.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Benegas, your microphone's on if your grade 4s have another question.
We're studying the structure of animals.
We were wondering, what is the structure of a manta ray?
Are they related to sharks?
Oh, okay. Yes. So mantas and all rays are actually related to the sharks. They're almost like their cousins. It really comes down to, I mean, a lot of their biology and their ecology sometimes is very similar, but really what it comes down to is their body shape. So like sharks are cylindrical, so they're kind of shaped more like a tube. And when you get rays, they're often flattened, you know, just so like my necklace, you have animals that are really, really flat. And so it almost comes down to the shape of an animal really that determines you know, whether it's a shark or a ray. And there's a couple of species, you know, like the shark ray, as you can imagine, as it sounds, it looks half like a shark and half like a ray. So it's almost really hard to tell the two apart. But really the underlying characteristics are very similar. So just like sharks, rays have cartilaginous skeletons. So their internal skeleton is entirely made up of the same stuff that's in your ear or the tip of your nose. And that's what makes these animals so flexible and wonderful and gives them such range of movement. You know, they also have a lot of the other same features that sharks have. You know, in terms of large livers instead of like air bladders, and a lot of other interesting features. They all have teeth that kind of fall out and get replaced over time. So all of those same kind of features the sharks and the rays share, but really it comes down to the shape of their bodies to determine whether it's a shark or a ray.
All right, you guys, boys and girls, you're doing amazing today. Your questions are just awesome. Let's go back to Mrs. Knope's grade for us.
Where are you? I'm gonna pop up out of nowhere. There you go.
What do you call a group of manta rays?
I didn't catch that.
Oh, you're gonna say it again.
What do you call a group of manta rays?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. People talk about, you know how you have a crash of rhinos and all of that, there's a name for every group of animals. Manta rays don't really aggregate in the same way that the other sort of rays do. So we don't really call it, I mean, I never refer to it as the same way that you call, the other things, but you do call it a shiver of sharks and you're supposed to call it a fever of rays. But because they don't really school the same way that some of these other rays do, we don't really refer to it like that, but really cool question. And I happen to really love the name shiver for sharks, but fever of rays is pretty cool too.
All right, and I see someone waiting very patiently in Mrs. Venegas's class, so we'll visit one more time.
Do you speak different languages when you go to different places?
Wow, that's a great question. I always in Joe's sort of broadcasts, I always get asked questions that I've never been asked before, and so you're the winner today. That's a really great question, and it's actually a really difficult part of doing work all around the world. So it's true, I do speak a few different languages. I speak Afrikaans, which is one of the languages they speak in Southern Africa. I've had to learn Portuguese because that's the national language of Mozambique. But when I've started programs in other countries, whether it's Ecuador or whether it's Thailand, which we have programs in, or Indonesia, I always start to try and learn the local language, but it's very difficult because you might be there for a couple of months and then you move to a different location and a different location. And I so desperately would like to be able to communicate with everyone in all of the places that we work. And I've been very excited that there are certain companies that are coming out with these amazing translate apps where people like me that travel extensively are able to kind of cheat a little bit with these translate apps. But yeah, great question. We definitely do try and pick up as much of the local language as possible when we travel.
All right, and Mrs. Knope's class, if you guys have a final wrap-up question, go ahead.
What's the average
Louder.
lifespan?
Louder.
What's the average lifespan of a manta ray?
Great question too. We never were sure, and even now we're not entirely sure. But basically, one of the ways that you tell for an animal like a manta ray, which has a very long lifespan, is you actually have. Remember, I told you about those photos that we take, and that identify an individual, well, we're able to actually recite the individuals over time in the same population to the point where we now know that animals at least live into their early 30s, because we've actually recited animals, certain biologists, including some of our researchers here in the places that we work on mantas, we've actually recited them over 25, 30-year periods. So we do know that they at least live into their 30s, but based on size as well, we estimate they probably live maybe 40 years, maybe 50 years. Whale sharks, which we also study, live in excess of 100 years. And so, you know, we're not exactly sure with mantas. We don't think they live as old as whale sharks do, or certainly some of the other whale species that we get on the planet. But we definitely think they're long-lived, and they probably live maybe between 40 or 50 years.
All right. Well, first of all, boys and girls, thanks so much for an awesome hangout. Your questions were great. And Andrea, as always, thank you for lugging our BGAN out into the field to do another hangout.
No problem. I hope you guys enjoyed beautiful Mozambique. I think everybody should have a look at what Mozambique looks like, hopefully later tonight. It's such a cool country. Not a lot of people travel here, so I'm really glad to be able to broadcast live from the field for you today, and hopefully you learn a little bit more about Mozambique, maybe in your geography class. It's a lovely location in Africa, really pristine and beautiful still, and we're really hopeful that we can offer this place a lot more protection in the future. So thanks for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it. And check you guys on another Explore by the Seat of Your Pants class at some point. Bye, guys.
Nice and loud, boys and girls.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Andrea, have a great night, and we'll see you again next week.